Well, many tragedies took place yesterday. One of them that hit me close to home was an absolute assault on our office's Wi-Fi. And so that means we were detached. And we also don't have cell service out here. I'll talk more about that on the bonus show. Click the join button below to get it. It's going to be a great rant. But that meant that for 24 hours, we were off the grid. Coming back to what had happened over the last 24 hours to see the hell that had broken loose, Trump's momentous, as he calls it, Liberation Day, in reality, Devastation Day, going very poorly, and then the fallout from it. That's what I want to go through in this segment. Let's start with the clips that you've likely seen of Trump making this announcement about what his actual, we've been desperately trying to figure out what's the actual economic plan here. What are you going to do? You keep announcing, then revoking, then announcing. What's the comprehensive plan? He sort of laid it out, and it's insane. And so let's look at these clips real quick. Then we'll get to this morning, him releasing a statement that is bonkers.
In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple. Can't get any simpler than that.
So it starts with that, and you go, okay, well, what is that exactly going to look like? But then he added layer after layer, like this one.
It happened, and they let it happen to an extent that nobody can even believe. That's why, effective at midnight, we will impose a 25% tariff on all foreign-made automobiles.
And if you thought that it couldn't get worse, it can. He said baseline minimum on every country, 10% tariff.
At the same time, we will establish a minimum baseline tariff of 10%. You notice that on the chart? And that'll be on other countries to help rebuild our economy and to prevent cheating. So we're going to have a minimum of cheating, and we're going to be very severe on the people that at the gate that watch the tariffs and watch the product coming in, because there's been a lot of bad things happening.
So in sort of summation, what we're going to see is U.S. companies paying mountains and mountains and mountains of taxes, extra taxes, and then passing that on to the consumer for all of the products that are imported. This is how the stock market is reacting. Bad is, I guess, how I would put it. This is the last 6 months. You'll notice around here-ish is whenever Biden left office, and it was steady before Trump started making big announcements. And then since then, it's absolutely collapsed. A total collapse we're seeing in real time. We'll get to a lot of reactions from, especially interesting, the friendly people to Trump, his supporters. Some of them even going, I think this is too much. But some of them being very propagandistic. One more clip from this before getting into that.
Never seen anything like that. With today's actions, we're also standing up for our great farmers and ranchers who are brutalized by nations all over the world. Brutalized. Canada, by the way, imposes a 250 to 300% tariff on many of our dairy products. They do the first can of milk. They do the first little carton of milk at a very low price, but after that it gets bad. And then
reminder, as we go through this, if you appreciate the show, please do click the subscribe button. The X community note system had to correct what he said. They're saying those high tariffs kick in only after the United States has hit a certain Trump negotiated quantity. Remember, Trump negotiated this, the USMCA that now he calls idiotic, of tariff-free dairy sales to Canada each year. And as the U.S. dairy industry acknowledges, the U.S. is not hitting its allowed zero tariff maximum in any category of dairy product. And this is a frequent issue we're going to run into as they make statements. It's not that there aren't, I'll circle back to this in a second, but it's not that there aren't trade barriers implemented by other countries, and maybe some that you would want to negotiate the end of. You do have to take into consideration the different characteristics of different economies, which industries, like we protect certain industries, and that gets you to ultimately the conclusion that we know for sure Trump's across the board on all imports strategy, just thinking we should isolate our economy when we benefit from the global trade that we're engaged in, is incoherent. But it's not that there aren't instances where other economies obviously place trade barriers like we do on certain things. It's that he will distort the truth to justify his radical policy. That was one example of it. So moving away from his speech he did, maybe we'll talk about later on the Bonus Show or something, get into other things like groceries, such an old-fashioned word, just a bizarre concept to him. But Ed Krasenstein posts, this is horrific. Trump just announced the following tariffs for the following countries and a 10% baseline tariff on all others not listed. And you can read through China, 34%, EU, 20%, Vietnam, 46%, Japan, 24%, and it goes down the list. As was mentioned, there's a baseline 10% that he's saying on countries that he feels are treating us poorly, then we're going to add extra tariffs on them spiraling this, and then they're going to respond, and then we're going to escalate, and this is the nature of a trade war. Now, normally, like Trump's first term, maybe you engage in a trade war with a country. You're getting crazy, you're feeling frisky, 2 countries. Trump's doing all the countries, all of them. Countries you've never heard of. They call it countries. We're doing all of them, and we're doing them hard. Trump posted back in October of 2024 this: I'm not proposing a national sales tax, as the Democrats say in their advertisements against me. Dems know what they're saying is a blatant lie. I'm proposing tariffs on other countries that take advantage of us. Hardly ANST. These tariffs are paid for by the abusing country, not the American consumer. They do not cause inflation and will make America rich again. So that was his promise to us before. It's obviously changed where now there's a whole lot of this. There might be a little pain rhetoric. Before moving further, let's check in on how Americans feel about this. Harry Enton doing a great job on CNN.
Harry, the press secretary criticized the people she calls the naysayers when it comes to these tariffs. Who are the naysayers?
The naysayers are the majority of the American public. It's the American people who are the naysayers. Oppose new tariffs on other countries. All goods. Look at this. 56% of Americans oppose new tariffs on all goods. How about cars in particular? 56% of Americans oppose new tariffs on imported cars and car parts. Look, the bottom line is the American people oppose. No. They do not want new tariffs. I looked at a ton of polling. It's really hard to find any in which you find folks supporting new tariffs.
Again, because everyone gets that in certain circumstances, tariff as an economic tool can be used for specific purposes to protect certain industries or for national security purposes or economic stability purposes. But Trump thinking he can dismantle the very global environment that has contributed to us being the economic superpower that we are and isolate us away from the rest of the world. He could do it. It would just mean a disaster for people and their wallets. Then one really bizarre thing he posted was this. He talks about Canada and fentanyl, not understanding that a tiny amount of fentanyl comes to Canada. Much more damaging stuff goes up into Canada as opposed to going down into the United States. But he says he's going to penalize Canada for the sale into our country of large amounts of fentanyl by tariffing the value of this horrible and deadly drug in order to make it more costly to distribute and buy. So if you miss what he seems to be saying, it's that he's tariffing something that's sold illegally, which is impossible. And actually, no, it's not. You know what? I'm inspired by this, actually. And so, Jaden, here with you as my witness, this is my Liberation Day. I and the Luke Beasley Show are announcing that we are going to be tariffing murder. We are going to be tariffing world hunger. I am here to announce to the American people that Luke Beasley is tariffing strongly and powerfully men who pee all over toilet seats in public restrooms and don't clean it up. I'll be tariffing the Republican Party. I'll be tariffing people who scream while they lift in the gym. Shut up, you're not that important. And I'll be tariffing my own body's production of fat. So it's a big moment in American history. Tariffing fentanyl? What does that mean? That doesn't make any sense. CNBC had this to say in the immediate wake of Trump's announcement.
Market reaction after hours, I've never seen anything like it. This, I think fair to say, is worse than the worst case scenario of the tariffs that many in the market expected the president to impose. You laid out a number of the percentages there, and there's some question of how the administration calculated the percentages that they're responding.
I love that. There's some question. They made them up, okay? That's, I think, what we can assume most of the time. Now, I referenced that it's not that there's nothing to be said about things we'd want to alter in global trade. Obviously, we always want to be working to enhance the interests of the United States. The problem with Trump's policies is this is not in our interest. Some supporters of his will try to frame this as, oh, it's the left who doesn't want us fighting for America. No, we don't like this because it's not good for America. That's the point. But the New York Times had an interesting piece saying, Trump says global trade is unfair. Does he have a point? President Trump says that countries have been ripping off the United States for decades. There's some truth to that argument, but also a lot of hypocrisy. And so his lies and distortions of what other countries are doing and extracting the context and then overreacting to the overstatement of other countries is only spiraling us into an economic crisis. And he misses that every country, based on the nature of its industries, does different things. And sometimes we do want to negotiate, but if he actually wanted specific changes, I just don't think he's studied enough to know what the changes would be that he wants. So then he takes the oversimplistic approach that we should isolate the entire economy, which again would cause an economic collapse. But if he was more thoughtful, he would say, here are the 10 things that we believe countries are doing wrong. We'll start with these 3 countries. And if you don't concede on these, then we will take economic measures. But instead, it's just he's been squirting out different policies. He's been announcing all these different policies and confusing everyone, and then believing that the ultimate outcome should be we don't do trade, it seems, or that we severely cut ties with a lot of our allies and trading partners. Then I think this was a good way to put it, a good metaphor. A CNBC contributor had this to say.
Sarah, you don't believe, though, the theory that it's just about getting rates down? That's really all it's about? Because you've heard it. I'm sure you've heard it. Everybody wants to talk about that.
They're getting the rates down.
That's it.
They're getting
burning
the rates
down
down
the house to cook a steak. That's the line.
I think if you have followed President Trump.
Yeah, burning down the house to cook a steak. That's essentially what's happening. There are small things that we probably could work to negotiate, like Trump said that he did with USMCA. And we said, this wasn't that significant. Very similar to NAFTA. And he said, no, it's great. And then later he went, this wasn't good, and agreed with us, I guess. But you could change those. Starting a trade war with every country and causing those countries to punish U.S. companies to achieve something you could have done through much more thoughtful means is the sign of an incoherent policy. Maria Bartiromo on Fox Business. Think about Fox having to cover this. I have a really funny example of one of the things they're doing to cover it, but she just had to say, ugh.
Futures this morning are indicating stocks will plummet at the opening of trading. The Dow Jones Industrial Average right now down 1,000 points. All 3 major indices finished higher earlier before the president spoke and made the announcement on tariffs. Stocks were higher across the board at the close. How investors are navigating markets ahead right now. European markets this morning also in the red. Deep declines. Then the FT 100 down 113. The DAX in Germany down better than 400. In Asia overnight, red across the board. The Asian indices finishing like this.
I love how Fox hosts have to word it. The stock market was looking great before President Trump went out and spoke, but then, interestingly, everything's looking worse. Instead of just specifically saying it was his fault, just sort of doing the cause and effect thing. Aaron Rupart took this screenshot, though, later on Fox Business, as they are tracking, as they always do, the stock market's utter spiral. But look at what they're covering. Presidential debate was a disaster for Biden. Really? Stuart Varney? Are you kidding me? We're talking about the presidential debate with Joe Biden? I think that's old news, Bubby boy. Rand Paul is one of the Republicans saying this is bad.
Tariffs have also led to political decimation. When McKinley most famously put tariffs on in 1890, they lost 50% of their seats in the next election. When Hott Smolley put on their tariff in the early 1930s, we lost the House and the Senate for 60 years. So they're not only bad economically, they're bad politically.
People want, by the way, he's talking about, he's opposed to them economically, but he's also opposed to this approach politically because it's going to be damaging to the Republican Party. I think his assessment's correct there. And we saw in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, there's already people who want to go show with their vote in opposition to this ideology and the connected parts of it and Doge and all the different things. We saw the tightening of the Florida special elections margins, even though the Republican won in these deep red districts. But please, I beg, Democrats, take a page out of Cory Booker's book and actually create an opposition that people can get excited about, because people want it, but you have to actually provide something that is the alternative. And then you have more from Rand Paul here.
What's the rationale for getting behind this?
Well, one, we should not live under emergency rule. The Constitution said taxes are raised by Congress. Most specifically, taxes originate in the House and come to the Senate. So I'm against emergency rule. But on the tariffs in particular, on the idea of trade is proportional to wealth. The last 70 years of international trade has been an exponential curve upwards, and the last 70 years of prosperity has been upwards also. We are richer because of trade with Canada, and so is Canada. Whenever you trade with somebody, when an individual buys somebody else's product, it's mutually beneficial, or you wouldn't buy it. If the trade is voluntary, it's always beneficial. There is no Canada versus the U.S. The consumer wins when the price is the lowest price.
So obviously there's more nuance than that. And someone like him with his libertarian views is going to go too far in the other direction. But on this, he and maybe a couple other Republicans are willing to say this is crazy, and there's a measure right now that would seek to revoke Trump's emergency authority, because that's what this is happening under. Otherwise, he would need congressional approval for this sort of tariff layout. But he's saying that it's a national emergency, which is silly. So in theory, Congress could grow some you-know-what and do something about it and revoke the emergency authority. Will they do that because it's a Republican Congress? Probably not. Probably not. But maybe. We can dream. Chris Murphy thinks this is not about economics, but something very different. He says those trying to understand the tariffs as economic policy are dangerously naive. No, the tariffs are a tool to collapse our democracy, a means to compel loyalty from every business that will need to petition Trump for relief. And then he goes through in this thread, you can find it on your own, the specifics of what he means there. And similarly explained in a Wall Street Journal piece, many are perceiving this as a chance for Trump to centralize even more power for himself.
They say that this is actually also opening the door to corruption. Mr. Trump is saying that there will be no tariff exemptions, but watch that promise vanish as politicians, including Mr. Trump, see exemptions as a way to leverage campaign contributions from businesses. Liberation Day is buy another yacht day for the swamp. Ooh. The swamp that he's supposed to be draining.
Yeah, that whole, oh my gosh, can you imagine? There are still Trump supporters who believe that Trump is draining the swamp when he's out building new swamps to fill more swamp water with. But he just wants it to be him who's bathing and swimming in the swamp water, as opposed to, he wants it to be him and his friends, other than, as opposed to the typical people who are benefiting from that corruption. That could be it. I mean, I do think he has an ideological incoherence. So I think he genuinely believes some of what he's saying about the economics of this. But also he sees the benefit of, you have tariffs on everyone, but you have the power to exempt certain companies and certain industries at will. So now companies are going to come, and we've already seen this with law firms who are now offering to do pro bono work for him, so he'll stop targeting them. We've seen it with media outlets bending the knee to him, and now he would be doing a similar thing with businesses. You have to come to me. Maybe you donate to my causes. Maybe you donate to the candidates I'm trying to get elected. Maybe you donate to my unconstitutional, illegal third-term campaign that I've been pontificating about, and maybe we all of a sudden think you need an exemption. A CNN contributor had this to say.
Any way you do the math, and I swear I've done this 100 times in my head, and once again, my whole life I've done this. It's just stupid policy beyond belief. I can't even describe.
I don't know who this is, but I really appreciate the way that he's speaking, because a lot of times on the news, there'll be this sort of mismatch between what the words are that are being said and the tone of the voice. We have news now that there are 68 people who have been murdered in cold blood, and we're going to move now to our weather report. And it's just, what the heck just happened? But he's going, this is insane. I want the energy from people so that viewers really get it. They feel it. They don't hear the words of this is bad, but they feel the visceral absurdity.
To you, the potential cost increase for just the average American. And that's really the problem with this all, just to extend tax cuts to the wealthy that they currently have today. He's actually proposing that I would get a tax cut of all people, which I don't want, okay, to fund these tariffs that effectively will bankrupt the lower and middle class of America. So this is
And this is the other part of it. I try to put this in context frequently for you all, but whenever you put the entire Trump administration agenda all into one frame, you look at it all at once, it is an unprecedented assault on the middle class. You take their budget proposal, which is simultaneously gutting programs like Medicaid while pushing more wealth to the very top, which is a crazy indication of their priorities, thinking that is even moral and not the disgusting act that it is. You then put on top of that the money that consumers are going to have to pay more in these tariffs. And you put on top of that DOGE gutting these programs that serve your average consumers, and specifically institutions like the NLRB, like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and more that seek to protect your everyday consumers from being defrauded by powerful people. And so we could get to the end of this 4 years and have generational damage to the working class's ability to advocate for itself, to afford things. And it is further gutted as a part of this broader agenda. And so we can't just talk about these things as one individual act, but a broader assault. Piers Morgan. Okay, so I'm predicting this is going to be bad. Okay, that's my prediction. Piers Morgan has a prediction too. Prediction, he says, President Trump's global President Trump's global tariff war is either going to be a spectacular success or a total disaster. I have no clue which. Well, thanks, Piers. That's real helpful. I have a prediction. Things are either going to be good or bad. Really? Really? Piers? You helped us understand nothing. The Economist has a piece, President Trump's mindless tariffs will cause economic havoc, but the rest of the world can limit the damage. It goes through a lot of interesting details as well. And of course, even though I pay for every single outlet under the sun, it never seems to work. So we'll stop that one there. JD Vance trying to defend this by saying,
also know people that come from our background, they're living paycheck to paycheck.
Of course.
And they want to do the patriotic duty of taking it to these other countries.
They don't. Why do we have to take it to them?
But it's going to hit them a little bit. They feel. What can you tell the American people that they just can't afford an extra $3 here and there about the government making up the difference from that? Will costs go up at some point? Will this just be temporary? Are we talking 3 months or 6 months?
Well, we certainly hear, and I appreciate, how I grew up.
I know.
I grew up in a family that often did live paycheck to paycheck, and we know a lot of Americans are worried. So we are fighting very hard to bring prices down. We're going to have the biggest deregulation in the history of this country. We're doing a lot of things and already have done a lot of things to lower the cost of energy. You heard the president mention this yesterday. Eggs, when we came in, were at a 10-year high, and all of a sudden they've dropped 60% just in the 2 months of the Trump administration.
No, that's wow. Very interesting little manipulation there, JD. That's after, while you were in office, they were spiking. Then they came down from their spike because no one predicted they were going to stay that high. It was a convergence of factors that were going to subside. And now you're taking credit for that.
What I'd ask folks to appreciate here is that we are not going to fix things overnight. Yeah. Joe Biden left us, this is not an exaggeration, Lawrence, with the largest peacetime debt and deficit in the history of the United States of America. With
only because of as we keep coming back to, my goodness, only because of the Trump tax cuts before that were, by law going into the Biden administration. So that's the only reason that we had the debt problem as bad as it was. Then if you took out both the Bush and the Trump ones that both benefited the tip top more than anyone else, we would be in a really good spot. And Trump added more than Biden did by a massive factor, more than any other president in the history of the country. Just a little bit more, because it is stunning to watch Trump administration officials try to defend this as on screen the stock market's collapse is playing out. Here is Brooke Rollins, the agriculture secretary.
While certainly the economy will be adjusting, the negotiations will continue. We are really, really excited and very grateful to President Trump's leadership and being willing to be bold and fearless in facing some pretty big policy challenges around the world.
So what?
We are so grateful that President Trump is so brave and willing to take on this economic crisis that he created. And it's stunning to see how no matter how many times he's really resilient in this way, no matter how many times this fails and he sees the bad outcome of it, he's brave enough to keep doing it because yeah.
And again, it's a whole new world based on Liberation Day yesterday.
Well,
you got that right.
President Trump yesterday gave you
a whole new world where everything's more expensive.
Much praise, talking about the job you've done in the last month and a half. I wanted.
Okay, so point is the requirement for these Trump administration officials is to go on TV and say, we thank President Trump. He's doing great. Maybe there'll be a little bit of uncertainty. Maybe things are going to be a little bit terrible. But it's good because we're proud of Trump and he's great. We love him. He's great. We love him. So we're going to be hearing a lot of that from his officials. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you do want to get the aforementioned bonus show, you can do it by clicking the join button below.